You know that nowadays HRCT is something which is done. HRCT is a very common thing. HRCT is done, and we normally quite a large number of clinicians rely on the report which has been given by the radiologist. However, if we learn the basics of HRCT from none other than Dr. Khushbu Pilania, she's a wonderful teacher. I've heard her speaking on the topics very often, and there has been a recent class also which she has done. So for this, we have Dr. R.S. Galut as our chairperson and Dr. Tej Singh Solanki who have joined. So I asked Dr. R.S. Galut to please introduce Dr. Khushbu Pilania, and we go ahead. Okay. So let me introduce the lady. She MBBS and MD in radiology. She's a consultant radiologist at Ezen Imaging and Interventions, Noida, and picture this by Jankaria, Mumbai. She's member of IIRA, ICS, INCCP, IMSOS, SCII, and American Institute of Ultrasound and Medicine. Various publications in national and international journals, and she's a very good teacher. I've heard her, and I know that she's a very good teacher. Over to you, Dr. Pilania, please.
Thank you so much, sir, for that kind introduction. And to be introduced at that forum from my alma mater is an even bigger pleasure. So just to brief, I did my MBBS and MD both from Dr. SN Medical College, Jodhpur. And so now it's indeed a big pleasure for me to be speaking here in front of all the dignitaries and from people from whom I've learned all my medicine all these years. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks again, Dr. Minawat and Glenmark for giving me the opportunity. Thank you, Gahlot sir. I have been a student with you for some time when I was doing my residency at SN Medical College. So is my screen visible and should I go ahead?
Yes. Yes, it is available.
So what I will be doing over the next 20 minutes is talking about HRCT basics. We've already been, briefed about the importance of HRCT by Dr. S.K. Chhabra, and he has shown it beautifully how important it is for us to know the HRCT well. So what we will be understanding is how do we do a systematic approach to interpret an HRCT. It all begins with getting it right. So the first and foremost step to get an HRCT diagnosis is to get the scan right. Especially over the last 1 year with this COVID pandemic, HRCT has been blown up a lot as an investigation modality. However, we fail to realize that HRCT done for COVID is different from what HRCT needs to be done for ILD. For COVID, HRCT is essentially a screening modality. However, for ILD, it needs to be a very specific and targeted modality, especially because now the onus is on HRCT to make the diagnosis. We are shifting more and more towards an HRCT diagnosis to decide our treatment rather than the histopathology. So the scanning technique has to be right. We cannot diagnose an HRCT without an adequate HRCT, especially when it is being done for an ILD. We need to get a supine scan, full inspiratory scan. It needs to be reconstructed well at 1 mm of 1 mm at 0.5 mm interval or even better. Especially nowadays when we have the helical scans, the scans need to be acquired in a helical acquisition, followed by a complete expiratory scan, which will again be either volume or an incremental scan. Then a prone scan, which should be done in the first instance for almost all ILDs, unless we have a radiologist or a pulmonologist viewing the scan and ruling out any dependent atelectasis. Followed by documentation, which is again very important because we need to be interpreting it, so we need to be seeing it well. We cannot interpret an HRCT on a 20:1 film. If it's being done on film still, it should be a 12:1 film, and if it is being done on a CD and USB, which is even better, that should be provided. Having said that, for when it is being done for COVID, we should always remember, because we are always looking into a scene where we try to minimize the contact. It is a single inspiratory scan, patient in, out, and that's it. Then we do not need to go through this lengthy protocol. Once the scan is right, it becomes much more easier and much more confident for us to give the diagnosis. However, the big dilemma with respect to diffuse lung diseases is that it's symmetry. And since our medicine days, we've been learning as radiologists especially that our body has two parts and look for asymmetry. Whenever there is asymmetry, we know the disease is there. However, these ILDs, they always defy those rules, and we need to know when even the symmetry is abnormal. So we need to know what is normal and abnormal before the interpretation. Now let's look at this scan. So it looks very symmetric, fairly symmetric. Maybe there isn't an abnormality. However, we need to know how a normal HRCT looks like. So the second image is of a normal HRCT. And once we know that this is how a normal HRCT looks like, it will be easier for us to say that this is definitely an abnormal lung, a diffusely diseased and an abnormal lung. So we should keep these images imprinted in our mind before trying to decipher whether what we are looking at is normal or abnormal. After the correct scan, after understanding that we are looking at an abnormal HRCT, the basics of HRCT is the second basic question, which as a radiologist will come to me from my colleague pulmonologist, is what are you seeing? Are you seeing fibrosis in the lung or are you not seeing? So that is the first question that I should try and answer to them. To identify fibrosis, one of the key features is honeycombing. We need to definitely know what is honeycombing, what is not honeycombing. The moment we say that yes, honeycombing is there, we've said that there is a fibrosing interstitial lung disease, because honeycombing is equal to fibrosis. And the moment you say it's a fibrosing interstitial lung disease, the entire plan of management moves on that line. So we need to be very clear with our definition of honeycombing. Honeycombing is a very clear-cut set of 4 to 5 features. It's like mathematics. Just put all of them together, you see all of them, and you know you are looking at honeycombing. So the first and foremost is cluster of cystic air spaces. So they are all clustered, cysts which are clustered. Second is single or multiple layers. So it can be either a single or multiple layers, one over the other. It will be characteristically subpleural, touching the pleura. They will share their walls with each other, and there will be architectural distortion in the lung. Once all these criteria are met, we know we are looking at honeycombing, and there is no doubt. There are few things which often complicate our diagnosis, which come into the differential diagnosis, but once we follow the definitions, things become much more easier. So let's see one by one. So on the right, I always have this honeycombing image, and on the left, I have the differential. The first differential is emphysema. So I see cystic spaces, but none of them have wall, none of them are sharing them, they are not clustered, and they are all scattered, they are not subpleural. It is definitely not honeycombing. Again, I see an emphysema, which is some subpleural, sharing wall, single layer. But why is it not honeycombing? Because there is no architectural distortion. Honeycombing does not happen without architectural distortion. Again, I see something where I'm seeing some architectural distortion, but what I don't see is that it is not subpleural, number one. And then these are all contiguous, these are not discrete. So in these cases, sometimes when we are viewing them on the computer, it helps because the multiplanar reconstructions that we do and the MIP and the min-IP images and the reformations we do help us see the contiguity of these cystic spaces with one another very well. The moment you see the contiguity, we know that we are looking at dilated bronchi and not honeycombing, and we can differentiate the bronchiectasis from honeycombing. Another important feature is that they all move towards the hyla. So when we have bronchiectasis, it's not so much subpleural, but it moves towards the hyla. Then the cystic lung diseases. So cystic lung diseases are again cysts, but how they differ from honeycombing is that there are discrete cysts scattered with intervening normal lung parenchyma, and there is no architectural distortion. So and then we have fibrosing versus non-fibrosing interstitial lung disease. So we know how to differentiate between the two. The others, I'm extremely sorry for that. So when we have fibrosing versus non-fibrosing, the other few features that come into our picture are, apart from honeycombing, whether or not there is traction bronchiectasis. Traction bronchiectasis is another very characteristic feature which helps us in defining a fibrosing interstitial lung disease, wherein we see that there are dilated bronchi, but there is associated architectural distortion. So this is a very characteristic feature of fibrosing interstitial lung disease. Another feature of fibrosing interstitial lung disease is reticular opacity. So we see a lot of lines in the lung and there is architectural distortion. So when, apart from honeycombing, we have traction bronchiectasis or reticular opacities, we know that we are looking at a fibrosing interstitial lung disease. Once we've defined a fibrosing interstitial lung disease, the other features that we need to be looking at to define the kind of interstitial lung disease that we are targeting include the background pattern. So the background pattern can be either reticular, or it can be a ground glass attenuation, it can be a nodular pattern or consolidation. So for each of these patterns, when we try to segregate the underlying pathology, if we can define these patterns furthermore, it becomes much more easier. So when we are looking at a reticular pattern, it means that I'm looking at a lot of lines in the lung. The lines can be like I see on this case, they're irregular lines. So the lines can be irregular. When they are irregular, we know that we are dealing with a fibrosing interstitial lung disease, which can be either a UIP or an IPF, or it can be a chronic HP. So an predominant irregular reticular pattern points to a fibrosing interstitial lung disease and is more commonly seen either with a UIP, IPF or a chronic HP. When these reticular patterns are smooth, so we see these lines which are all very smooth. I have a normal lung adjacent to it, so we know what abnormality we are looking at. When these lines are these smooth, we know that what we are dealing with is pulmonary edema. So the moment you try to define your pattern and subtype it, the diagnosis comes hand in hand with an HRCT. Similarly, when you have a lot of lines, but they are nodular, so you have a reticular and nodular pattern going on together, you know that you are dealing with either sarcoidosis or lymphangitic carcinomatosis. Then, having said that and having dealt with the reticular pattern as a predominant pattern, the second common pattern that comes is a nodular pattern. Again, with respect to nodular pattern, we need to answer two questions. Number one, what is the distribution of the nodules? And number two, what is the character of the nodules? So the nodules can have a peribronchovascular fissural distribution, a centrilobular distribution, or a random distribution, and the nodules can be either very discrete or ill-defined. So let's see one by one. When I look at this picture, I see a very peribronchovascular fissural distribution of the nodules, and all of these nodules are very discrete because they are very well defined. After that, we look at them, and such a kind of a pattern when we look at, we know that we have two topmost differentials in our mind, which is sarcoidosis or lymphangitic carcinomatosis. The other kind of pattern that I'm seeing here are all nodules. So these are very discrete nodules, but they don't have any typical pattern of distribution. They're all randomly distributed. So when we see such a kind of pattern, the two top differentials that come to our mind are pneumoconiosis and miliary tuberculosis. Another very characteristic pattern of nodules in the lung is the centrilobular. So we call them centrilobular because we see this peripheral sparing. So these nodules are all along the bronchi, but they are very ill-defined because we have to strain our eyes to look into these nodules. So when you see such ill-defined centrilobular nodules, these are very, very characteristic of acute hypersensitivity pneumonitis. So we see that how, going step by step, trying to understand the pattern and subtyping the pattern helps us narrow our differentials in a much systematic fashion. Then amongst the other patterns, we have the ground glass pattern, which we've always been hearing that it is a differential attenuation of the lung when the lung parenchymal attenuation is higher, but it still does not occlude the vessels. So the vessels are still being seen. The moment the vessels are occluded, it moves from ground glass to consolidation. So these are all consolidation patches where the vessels are also occluded because of these white patches in the lung. So that's how the GGO is differentiated from the consolidation. So these become the four predominant pattern in the lung that we look at. So we talked about the reticular, the nodules, the ground glass, and the consolidation. Often these patterns come in combination. So what I see here is ground glass and consolidation both happening together. Such a pattern is very characteristically called the reverse ground glass or the Etoll sign. We've seen it in and out in the COVID era. Earlier on, it used to be a very characteristic sign for certain pathologies. However, with the COVID, nothing else but COVID manifests with these findings. Another very characteristic pattern seen very floridly in the COVID era is this crazy paving, where I see the ground glass and the reticulations happening together. Prior to the COVID era, pulmonary alveolar proteinosis used to be the most typical diagnosis for such a presentation on HRCT. So once we've decided the pattern, once we've got the HRCT, decided the pattern, differentiated fibrosing from non-fibrosing, we need to say how the pattern is distributed. We need to describe the distribution of the pattern on the axial as well as the coronal planes. So on the axial, we try to say whether the predominant disease is towards the periphery. So I see that the center portion of the lung is spared. The disease has a peripheral distribution. After peripheral distribution, the second thing is whether it is subpleural or not. So I see that the disease has a peripheral distribution and it touches the pleura. So it's a peripheral subpleural disease. However, in this case, again, I see that the center of the lung is rather spared. So definitely the disease has a peripheral distribution, but the pleura is not touched. So it's a peripheral distribution, but with subpleural sparing, a very characteristic feature seen with non-specific interstitial pneumonitis. Often the disease has a diffuse distribution, so I cannot say whether the center is involved more or the periphery is involved more. Both the center and the periphery are equally involved. So such cases we say that the disease has a diffuse or a peribronchovascular distribution. Once we've defined the disease on the axial pattern, we need to say the zonal distribution, wherein whether the upper lobes are involved or the lower lobes are involved. So in this case, I see that the disease has a lower zone predominance or a basal predominance. However, in this case, I see that the upper lobes are involved more and the lower lobes are spared. So once you have put all that together, all that on a paper, you will in 90 to 95% have a clear-cut understanding of what you are looking at, what you should be thinking of and talking to your referring physician, pulmonologist, or as a pulmonologist, what disease you are looking at, what you can just rule out. So it's very simple. The first question that we ask, honeycombing, yes or no. Second question that we ask is, what is the predominant pattern amongst all of these? Then what is the zonal distribution of the disease? Whether it's a peripheral, subpleural, or a diffuse axial distribution. So once we have done all that, the HRCT basics are done, we have a clear-cut understanding of what disease we are looking at, and we will be fairly, wise when we discuss the management of the patient. So it's just a very short diagnostic algorithm. I'll go through it very fast to understand what we've talked all over. So the first question was, when we look at an HRCT, it's a fibrosing or a non-fibrosing, which depends upon whether we see honeycombing, traction bronchiectasis, or reticulations. If these are present, we are looking at a fibrosing disease. I'm not going into the definite probable UIP pattern, but once you know what that pattern is, and if that pattern is fixed, we know that in a proper clinical scenario, we are looking at idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. The only idea of saying this is that with HRCT, we conclude idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis even without a tissue diagnosis. And that's why the importance of HRCT is. In all other cases, the algorithm moves, as we said, we try to understand what is the predominant pattern, how it is distributed, and then take it from there. So just before winding up, the take-home messages are: an adequate technique is an absolute must. Without it, interpreting an HRCT does not make sense. Please try and circulate it. Whenever you are sending as a physician your HRCT to any scanner, try to tell them that I need an ILD protocol. If they don't know what an ILD protocol is, circulate a screenshot of this PPT, or you will get it across that I need it with this protocol: full inspiration, full expiration, and a prone image. Whenever it's a DLD, try to look for honeycombing, try to differentiate fibrosing from non-fibrosing. If we are not able to do anything else, even if we differentiate fibrosing from non-fibrosing, a large part of our management concerns are done. Then we try to pinpoint the predominant pattern, and that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, madam. As I said, I know you are a wonderful teacher. I have heard you before and I have seen the pictures before. And I find that you are so precise and so concise in telling that if somebody remembers even half of the job, it will be done. Dr. Gehlot, sir, if you have any comments or any queries, sir, please go ahead. So please unmute yourself. Unmute.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you listen me?
Yes, sir.
For a clinician, what are the cases where simple X-ray test should be have the recommendation of HRCT? Because routinely we don't advise for HRCT. That is the question. Okay.
Khushbu, have you been able to hear the question?
Sir, I could hear it only partly, sir.
See, what he wants to say is that we don't go for CT scan for all the patients. So where exactly do you think that an X-ray would be enough? And what are the indications for a CT scan only? Because all patients cannot go for a CT scan.
Also, in those CT scan, where to advise for the HRCT also?
Yes.
So, sir, first and foremost, like for example, when it's an acute case, if it's just come acutely, most of the times we do a X-ray first to understand what the predominant pathology is, and if the patient is not compliant to do a CT scan, that will be an indication for X-ray. For follow-up X-rays suffice that in case we know that we are following up the patient for long, often we can do away with the X-rays and follow up the patient on the X-rays. However, when we want to make our primary diagnosis in a patient for an ILD where we are strongly suspecting an ILD, an HRCT becomes an absolute must, because then we can, a lot of management can be directed according to the findings that we're seeing.
That means once diagnosed ILD, to find out the pathology of ILD, we better go for an HRCT.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what is the difference between a plain CT thorax and an HRCT?
So, sir, HRCT is a high resolution CT scan in which the scan parameters have been modified in a way that the lung parenchymal details are seen better. So these are reconstructions which are done in the current era with the multi-slice and the Helicert CT scanners. These are usually reconstructions which are done on the multi-slice scanner. And the acquisition remains the same, but we need to reconstruct it into an HRCT mode. And moreover, over and above, what is important is the kind of protocol that you are following. So when it becomes an HRCT with an ILD protocol, the inspiration, expiration, supine, and prone scans, all of that becomes an absolute must.
Quite right. In fact, yes, unless you do the whole protocol, majority information will not be obtained. Quite right. And as you rightly said, in COVID, we don't need an expiratory because it's only a screening sort of a thing. So
exactly.
That's of course correct. Sir, Dr. Gehlot, anything else we want to ask her, sir?
Okay, very good. Thank you.
There will be a question here. Can it be used? No. Best method to There's one question, Khushbu. Just a moment, I'll get a question for you.
Sir, there is one question. When do you say the esophagus is dilated in HRCT? Give some tips on how to look for it.
So, whenever we are acquiring an HRCT, the esophagus will be invariably seen as a part of it. And It's just that these are few things that I said when I mentioned in my slide. Anything else, these are the things that we should also be looking at. So when we have acquired an HRCT, we should not forget that we've also acquired the mediastinum along with it. So look for the lymph nodes, look for the esophagus, because the dilated esophagus is a strong indicator of an underlying the lung disease pattern. Can be an NSIP pattern which is associated with maybe scleroderma or Sjogren's. So these are few things that we need to always keep a look on. The voice, it's not audible. I'm unable.
Thank you, Khushbu. Thank you very much. I'm
Thank
very thankful that you have spared so much of time for us and explained the basics of HRCT. Next time, we'll be talking about even more details about the intricacies of CT next time. Thank you very much for providing time for us.